Hello and welcome back to Fat Boss TV. Today we're looking at the Lady Darkvein encounter in Castle Nathria. So this boss is absolutely great. It's easily one of the better encounters in the instance, but it does have a fair amount of abilities that need to be explained. So before we go too deep on how much we enjoyed it, let's jump straight in with the main mechanic. So this boss has 4 abilities, each of which is linked to a physical container within the room. There are 2 on the left and there are 2 on the right. As the fight progresses, these slowly fill up with energy over time, and this is shown in a new UI element. At 33 and 66% full, the abilities linked to that particular container will become augmented, making them harder to deal with. And at 100 energy, any container will just begin to pulse lethal damage to the entire raid. So to release the energy in the containers, you can simply just click on them. This will just remove the energy pretty quickly whilst dealing light raid-wide ticking damage. So you'd think that the strategy here is just to click on them whenever they're about to go above 33%, that way you'll never have to deal with any of the augments throughout the entire fight, and the actual strategy isn't too far from that. However, there is just one other complication in play. Right from the start, the boss will focus the far left container. Whilst it's focused, it will gain energy faster, but it also cannot be clicked on to release its power. This focus lasts for 100 seconds, and over this time the container will gain approximately 70 to 75 energy. This however can be broken early, as the boss will break focus not only after 100 seconds, but also if you're able to remove 25% of her health during that time, which is more likely to be the case. After the focus is broken from the first, it will then be applied to the container directly to its right, and this repeats until it's on the final container on the far right hand side. As all containers are slowly gaining energy regardless if they're being focused or not, we set up a simple rule of always clicking and releasing energy from a container if they're next to be focused, as you don't want the container that's just about to be focused to already have a shit ton of energy in it, and 2, if the focus on that container has just ended, as you'll want to empty all of the energy that was generated over the duration of the focus. If you understand and manage to pull that off, you've essentially got that part of the fight down. So let's look at each container and how it augments the ability. The first container is linked to the exposed desires. This is a burst of physical damage on the tank that leaves behind a dot. You'll want to swap around 2 stacks. At 33% in the container, random raid members will be debuffed, which links the players with the tank. This makes a portion of the damage that the tank takes also to be shared with these players. There's not really anything you can do about this, it's just important healers be aware and ready to keep all players healthy. At 66% in the container, this will make it so when the tank debuffs eventually expire, they'll explode, dealing raid damage. This is listed in the dungeon journal as drop-off damage, but it appears it's not your traditional drop-off damage where you'll just want to get maximum distance away from the raid, and instead is a relatively small targeting circle around you that you'll just want to make sure that no other player is within. The next container focused is to do with a bottled anima. When cast, this spawns multiple targeting circles throughout the room that need to be soaked. If a single one is missed, it deals massive and likely lethal raid-wide damage. You only need a single player to soak each patch, and doing so does a moderate burst of damage to that person. At 33% in the container, when a patch is soaked, it will also leave behind a puddle. These deal pretty high ticking damage and are just more annoying than anything else, but there's nothing you can do about them really aside keeping out of them. At 66%, this is made a little worse, as you need to soak the bottled anima twice, as they'll bounce after soaking the first, spawning even more puddles. The next container is the Sins and Suffering. This ability spawns 3 orbs within the room that deal ticking damage to the nearest players, and at the same time, 3 players in your raid are debuffed with shared suffering. This creates a beam between the 3 players that can be used to destroy the orbs. You need to line up your beams in such a way that each orb is hit by a single beam simultaneously in order to destroy all of them. If you take too long to do this, the orbs will eventually explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage over 10 seconds. At 33% in the container, the orbs will be linked themselves by their own beam. This deals large damage to anyone hit by them, so it's really important that you don't run through them. More than anything else, it just makes destroying them take that little bit longer, as the debuff players will have to take the long route round to position themselves. And at 66%, this beam will no longer be static and will begin to rotate around the orbs, making it even more difficult to destroy them. As for the final container, it is linked with a concentrated anima. This is a debuff for multiple raid members, dealing ticking damage over 10 seconds. When it expires, it deals a moderate burst of damage to all players within 8 yards and spawns some adds. You'll always have one Harness Spectre, and these guys are completely rooted and do not move, and they need to be tanked, otherwise they'll just spam cast Condemn, dealing massive raid-wide damage, and this cannot be interrupted. When being tanked, they'll do a burst of shadow damage and increase the damage you take from that effect by 10%, and this stacks up. But it's not cast too often, so providing your DPS is on point, you shouldn't really ever need to swap. As for the other edge, you'll get Conjured Manifestations, and the amount of these guys you get is based on your raid size. These guys will just spam cast Condemn and do absolutely nothing else, however their version can be interrupted. We found it best just to nuke these guys first before swapping to the tank ad. We made sure to spawn these adds as close together as possible just to maximise the amount of cleave damage we can do. Whilst it's possible to spawn them all directly on top of one another, the splash damage on the players spawning them with their debuff would easily get comboed from other mechanics, and we found that just by spawning them as close together without splashing in melee worked perfectly fine. At 33% in the container, players are immediately rooted over the duration of the debuff. This makes spawning them in melee basically impossible unless you're really lucky with the initial targets chosen for the debuff. But if you look really closely at timers and you move close to the boss just before this debuff comes out, you are definitely going to help on that front. At 66% in the container, when the adds spawn, fragments are also sent out in all directions, and these do a lot of damage if you're hit by them, so you've got to keep a really close eye on their spawn location and make sure you're quick to dodge them. But that's all the mechanics that are in play and how the fight works on Heroic.